A stunning millionaire laughed and said, "If you can play this piano, I'll adopt you." She mocked a poor little girl in front of everyone. But when the child touched the keys, the entire room froze. No one was ready for what came next. But before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from? We love hearing your stories. Now let's get started. The Harrington estate looked like something painted out of a dream. High on the hill, the mansion gleamed with ivory-colored stone, its tall windows blazing with golden light. The air itself seemed different around the estate, as though money had turned the night sky silkier, the stars brighter. Limousines lined the curved driveway, and guests in glittering gowns and crisp tuxedos stepped out onto the red carpet rolled across the marble steps. Tonight was the Harrington Charity Gala, the most anticipated event of the year. The chandeliers inside were lit with 1,000 candles, their crystals scattering light like raindrops of fire across the grand ballroom. Violinists played softly in one corner. Waiters weaved through the crowd with silver trays of champagne, and a polished, grand piano sat in the center of the room, gleaming under the lights. At the heart of it all stood Isabella Harrington. She was the kind of woman who stopped conversations when she entered a room. Her gown shimmered in sapphire blue silk, clinging to her figure in a way that seemed designed to remind everyone that she belonged to another world. Her hair, golden, carefully styled in waves, framed a face sculpted as if for magazine covers. High cheekbones, striking green eyes, lips curved in a smile that never quite reached warmth. Guests surrounded her, laughing a little too loudly at her remarks, admiring her diamond necklace that caught the chandelier's glow. Isabella was used to attention. She thrived on it, but she also thrived on something else: control. She enjoyed setting the stage, being the center of the evening's story, making others smaller so she could shine larger. And then, into this world of gold and glass, Amara stepped quietly. She was only 9 years old, and the clothes she wore told the story of her life without words. A faded dress mended at the hem, and a pair of scuffed shoes too large for her feet. In her hands she carried a rag. She had been helping her mother polish silver trays in the kitchen, but the sound of music had pulled her closer until she found herself standing at the edge of the ballroom, eyes wide at the sight of the glittering chandelier, the women swirling in gowns, the shining piano that seemed to breathe under the lights. No one noticed her at first. She was small enough to blend with the pillars, timid enough to avoid the spotlight. But as fate would have it, Isabella's sharp eyes landed on her. The corner of Isabella's lips tugged upward. She tilted her head, her green eyes narrowing, the way a cat notices a mouse in the wrong corner. She raised her champagne flute, the diamonds on her wrist glittering as she gestured toward Amara. "Well, well." Isabella's voice rose above the polite murmur of the party. "What is this?" Heads turned. Conversations paused. In an instant, every guest's gaze shifted to the little girl standing barefoot on polished marble. Amara froze. She hadn't meant to step so far in. Heat rushed to her cheeks as her fingers tightened around the rag. She wanted to disappear, but the room had already locked her in its glare. Isabella walked toward her, each click of her stiletto heels echoing across the silent hall. She stopped just inches away, lowering her eyes with a smile too sharp to be kind. "Look at this, everyone," Isabella said, her voice lilting with amusement. "Did the staff bring their children tonight?" Soft chuckles rippled through the room. A few guests covered their mouths politely. Others whispered behind fans. Amara lowered her head. I'm sorry," she whispered. Her voice was so small it nearly drowned in the music. "I was just looking." "Looking?" Isabella repeated, her laughter like glass breaking. "Darling, you don't look at a gala. You serve, or you stay hidden. That's how it works." The sting in her words drew another round of laughter. Amara's shoulders hunched. She wanted to run back to the kitchen to the safety of her mother's side, but her feet wouldn't move. Something about the way Isabella's eyes glittered, amused and cruel, rooted her there. Then Isabella's gaze flicked toward the piano. She reached out, tracing her manicured nails along the polished wood. "Tell me, little one," she said sweetly, though her tone dripped with mockery. Have you ever seen something so fine? This piano costs more than most homes in this city, and it's not for touching. The room chuckled again. Amara's wide eyes remained on the keys. She didn't answer, but her silence betrayed her longing. Isabella caught it. Her smile widened, wicked with the opportunity to turn the moment into her entertainment. She turned back to the crowd, lifting her hand as though about to deliver the line of the evening. "Shall we make this interesting?" she said, her voice carrying. "Let's see if our little guest has hidden talents. If you," she pointed a diamond-studded finger at Amara, "can play this piano, really play it, I'll adopt you myself." Gasps and laughter filled the air at once. Someone clapped, another whispered, "She won't dare." A man in a velvet suit added, "This will be amusing." Amara's eyes widened. Her heart thumped so hard she thought it might leap from her chest. Adopt her? As if she were some stray kitten? She already had a mother who worked day and night in the kitchen just to keep a roof over their heads. But the way Isabella said it, the smugness, the certainty that Amara would fail, lit something inside the little girl. She looked at the piano again. The glossy keys seemed to whisper to her. Memory stirred, her father's hands guiding hers on an old broken keyboard, his voice gentle. "Don't just touch the notes, Amara. Feel them. Music is the voice of the soul." The guests were waiting, eager for the child to embarrass herself. Isabella folded her arms, her smirk fixed in place. "Well?" she pressed. "Do you know anything besides scrubbing floors? Or shall I excuse you back to the kitchen where you belong?" The words landed like stones in Amara's chest. Her small hands trembled. She wanted to cry, but instead, she took one, stepped toward the piano. The room quieted. Isabella's eyes glittered with cruel delight. "Oh, this will be entertaining." Amara's heart pounded, but her gaze never left the keys. Somewhere deep within her, courage whispered louder than fear. She placed her rag aside, climbed onto the piano bench, and let her small fingers hover above the ivory. The crowd leaned in, laughter bubbling at the edges, waiting for her shame. And there, in the grandest ballroom of the city, under the glitter of chandeliers, a little girl prepared to face the weight of a world that had already decided she was nothing. The silence in the ballroom was thick, the kind that presses on every chest until even a cough feels too loud. Amara's tiny frame looked impossibly small against the grandeur of the grand piano. Her dress hung loosely on her shoulders, her shoes barely touching the ground as she perched on the velvet-covered bench. The guests leaned in, waiting for the inevitable, a child fumbling, a note struck wrong, laughter erupting once more. But Amara wasn't looking at them. She wasn't looking at Isabella Harrington, whose sapphire dress shimmered like royalty and whose smirk rested in quiet triumph. Amara's eyes were locked on the piano. The glossy black surface reflected her anxious face back at her. For a moment, she saw not the trembling child she was now, but the memory of a little girl sitting on the edge of a torn couch, her father's gentle hands guiding hers over chipped plastic keys. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Music isn't about impressing people, Amara. It's about telling them who you are, without saying a word." Her small fingers hovered, trembling above the ivory keys. The guests chuckled under their breath. "Come now," a man whispered too loudly, his tone dripping with mockery. "Any moment now she'll press something and run away crying." Another voice added, "Imagine a ragged child playing this piano. It's absurd." The words stung, but Amara inhaled deeply. She closed her eyes. The murmur of the crowd faded. The chandelier's light dimmed in her mind, and all she could hear was the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. She let it guide her. And then, she pressed one key. A single, delicate note floated into the air. It was so soft that some guests laughed, outright convinced she was proving their point. But Amara didn't stop. Her fingers moved again, pressing another note, then another. At first it was hesitant, the sound fragile like footsteps on ice. But then, something shifted. Her body remembered what her mind feared to forget. Muscle memory took over. Her father's lessons. The nights she had practiced on a broken keyboard in the dim light of a flickering lamp poured through her fingers. The notes began to link together, forming a melody, shy, then steady, then strong. The laughter stilled. Glasses lowered, eyes widened. It was not the polished precision of a concert pianist, but something far rarer. Music played with raw, aching truth. The melody rose, filled with the weight of loss and the spark of hope. It carried in it the quiet strength of her mother who worked without rest, the gentle love of her late father who believed in her, and the silent courage of a child who had learned far too early what it meant to be invisible. The ballroom was spellbound. Amara's back straightened as her confidence grew. Her small fingers danced across the keys, weaving notes that rose and fell like a story only she could tell. Each sound seemed to linger in the air, wrapping itself around the hearts of those who listened. Even Isabella's smirk faltered. Her green eyes narrowed, not in mockery now, but in something she hadn't felt in years: surprise. She had expected humiliation. But instead, this child was stealing the very air from the room. The melody soared higher. For Amara, the ballroom was gone. She was no longer surrounded by strangers waiting for her to fail. She was back in that small living room, where her father's voice had guided her. She was playing for him, for her mother, for herself. "Don't be afraid of silence," she remembered her father saying. "Music lives there too. When you stop, people will lean in closer. That's when you truly have them." And so, with a maturity beyond her years, Amara allowed the melody to pause. The silence that followed wasn't mocking, it was reverent. Dozens of wealthy guests leaned forward unconsciously, as if their very souls longed for the next note. Then her fingers struck again, filling the silence with sound so beautiful it made one woman in the crowd press a hand to her mouth. A man in the corner blinked hard as though holding back tears. By the time Amara's fingers found the final chord, the ballroom was utterly transformed. The mocking smiles were gone. Laughter had been replaced with awe. She lifted her hands from the keys slowly, as though the last note still hummed through her fingertips. For a heartbeat, the room remained frozen. Then from the back, a sound broke the stillness. Applause. Soft at first, then stronger, until the entire ballroom erupted in thunderous clapping. Amara's chest rose and fell quickly. She stared at the polished wood before her, too afraid to look up. The applause felt unreal, like a dream she might wake from. But when she finally lifted her gaze, she saw faces she had never seen before. Faces that looked at her not with pity or disdain, but with something else: respect. And for the first time in her young life, Amara felt visible. Across the room, Isabella Harrington clutched her champagne glass so tightly the stem threatened to snap. Her flawless smile wavered. This was not how the evening was supposed to go. She had meant to amuse herself, to demonstrate her power with a cruel little game. Yet somehow, a ragged child had stolen the stage she thought she owned. Still, Isabella was too practiced in the art of control to let her shock show for long. She raised her chin and let her smile return, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well," she said, her voice carrying through the clapping, "it seems the child has surprised us." Her words were light, but her thoughts were heavy. Somewhere deep inside, something she could not name stirred uneasily. But Amara didn't notice. She slid off the bench, her legs trembling, her heart racing, but her spirit burning brighter than it ever had before. She had played. She had faced them. And though she was just a child in worn shoes and a faded dress, for those few moments she had commanded the grandest room in the city. The last notes of Amara's song still seemed to linger in the ballroom like perfume, long after her fingers had left the keys. Guests were whispering in hushed tones, some still clapping, others too stunned to move. The chandeliers sparkled above as though celebrating her triumph, and the grand piano gleamed as if it, too, had waited years for such a moment. But amidst the applause and astonishment, a sharp voice broke through. "Amara!" The child stiffened instantly. She turned her head toward the open doorway, and there stood Grace, her mother, dressed in a plain, Uniform and an apron dusted with flour from the kitchen, she looked as though she had stumbled into the wrong world. This glittering hall of diamonds and gold. Her eyes, however, were full of fear, darting from the piano to the stunned crowd, and finally to her daughter sitting at the center of it all. The applause faded. The guests turned toward the interruption. Grace hurried across the polished floor, her worn shoes squeaking against marble, her hands trembling. She reached Amara and gathered her into her arms as though trying to shield her from the dozens of eyes watching. "I told you to stay with me in the service quarters," Grace whispered urgently, her voice breaking. "What were you thinking, child? You don't belong in here." Her words carried more sorrow than scolding. Amara clung to her mother's apron, guilt tightening in her chest. She wanted to explain that she hadn't meant to shame her, that she hadn't been able to resist the pull of the music. But the words wouldn't come. Isabella Harrington, who had been watching with arms folded and a faint, carefully controlled smile, finally stepped forward. Her heels clicked against the marble, her presence once again commanding the room. "Well," she said smoothly, her voice dripping with practiced charm. "That explains a great deal. The help's daughter, is she? How quaint." Grace immediately lowered her head, her cheeks burning. She pulled Amara closer as if bracing for humiliation. I am so sorry, Mrs. Harrington," she stammered. "Please forgive her. I had no one to leave her with tonight. She begged me to let her help clean, and I thought—" Her voice cracked. "I thought she would stay with me in the kitchen. She must have wandered off. Please, it won't happen again." The room was silent, save for the rustle of gowns and the clink of someone nervously setting down a champagne glass. Isabella arched a perfectly sculpted brow. "Forgive her?" she repeated, amusement tugging at her lips. "My dear woman, your daughter just gave us all the most unexpected performance of the evening, hardly the crime of the century." Her tone was light, but underneath it was a sharp edge. The crowd felt it, the reminder of the mockery that had started it all. Grace's face went pale. She turned to her daughter, whispering urgently, "You should never have touched that piano. We don't touch what isn't ours. Do you understand, Amara? We're not like them." The words sliced at Amara's young heart. She pressed her face into her mother's side, wishing she could shrink until she disappeared. But then, from somewhere in the crowd, a voice spoke. That wasn't just luck. Every head turned. An older gentleman in a silver-gray suit known among the guests as Mr. Lawrence Whitaker, one of the city's most respected philanthropists, stepped forward. His voice was steady, thoughtful. "That child didn't stumble through those notes. She played with skill, with heart, better than most professionals I've heard." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Several nodded in agreement. A woman near the front dabbed at the corner of her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Another guest, a music professor from the conservatory, added softly, "It takes years to play with such emotion. That wasn't learned from nowhere." Grace held Amara tightly, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Slowly, she lifted her chin, though her voice was quiet when she spoke. "Her father—" She swallowed hard. "Her father was a teacher. He taught music before he passed away. He never had much, but he believed music could give our daughter wings. He taught her every night until the illness took him." Her words cracked like fragile glass. "Since then, I've done what I can, cleaning houses, scrubbing floors, anything to keep us fed. But she—" Grace looked down at Amara, brushing a trembling hand over her daughter's hair. "She carries his gift. His soul lives in her music." The room was still. Some guests looked away, ashamed. Others stared at the child with newfound awe. Isabella, however, did not soften so easily. She forced a light laugh, though it rang hollow. "A touching story, truly," she said, sipping from her glass. "But let's not get carried away. She is a sweet little girl with a talent, yes, but talent doesn't erase the facts. She doesn't belong in this world. Music schools, fine instruments, opportunities. Those aren't for children like her." Her words drew a ripple of discomfort. through the crowd. For the first time that evening, Isabella's confidence seemed to falter. People were no longer nodding at her remarks, but frowning. A few whispered behind their hands. Mr. Whitaker's voice cut through again. "With respect, Mrs. Harrington," he said firmly, "I think tonight has shown us something important. Perhaps the question isn't whether she belongs here, but whether we've been blind not to see the beauty hidden in places we dismiss." Applause broke out, not loud, but strong enough to echo across the hall. Isabella's cheeks flushed. Though her smile remained frozen, Grace's eyes filled with tears. She held Amara tighter, whispering, "You did nothing wrong, my darling. Nothing at all." And for the first time that evening, Amara believed her. The ballroom moments earlier filled with the swell of music and applause now pulsed with tension. Grace held Amara close, her hand pressed firmly against the back of her daughter's head, as though shielding her from the eyes of the glittering crowd. The guests stood in silence, their jeweled gowns and polished shoes glinting beneath the chandeliers, but their hearts felt heavier than the sparkle above them. At the center of it all stood Isabella Harrington. Her sapphire gown shimmered. Her diamonds still caught the light, but something had shifted. Where her smile once radiated effortless power, now it faltered at the edges. The murmur of the crowd was no longer admiration. It was judgment. She had mocked a child, and the child had answered with a melody that exposed the emptiness of her cruelty. And the promise she had made hung over the room like an unfinished chord. "If you can play this piano, I'll adopt you myself." Mr. Whitaker's voice, steady and low, reminded everyone. "Mrs. Harrington, those were your words." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Yes, she said it. She promised. Will she follow through? Isabella's grip on her champagne glass tightened. She had meant it as a joke, a cruel amusement. But now the words bound her like iron. She lifted her chin, her green eyes sweeping over the faces of the crowd before landing on Grace and Amara. "Well," Isabella said slowly, her voice smooth but strained, "a lady does not take back her promises. If I said I would adopt her, then so be it." Gasps scattered through the hall. Grace's knees nearly buckled. She pulled Amara closer, horror etched on her face. "No," she whispered, shaking her head fiercely. "Please no, she is my child. She belongs with me. I may be poor, I may be nothing in your eyes, but she is my everything." Amara clung to her mother's apron, her small face pressed against the fabric. Tears pricked her eyes, not from shame, but from fear. She could not imagine life without her mother's warm embrace, her whispered prayers at night, her worn hands braiding her hair. The crowd stirred uneasily. What had begun as entertainment was now a spectacle that felt cruel. Woman in pearl spoke softly, almost guiltily. "Mrs. Harrington, surely you didn't mean to separate a child from her mother. That would be—" She faltered, searching for a word. "Heartless," another man added. "If you wish to help, perhaps there is a better way." The pressure in the room pressed down like a storm about to break. Isabella's jaw tightened. She had built her life on never showing weakness, on commanding every room she entered. But for the first time in years, she felt the eyes of others not filled with envy but with quiet condemnation. And beneath their stares, something inside her shifted. Her gaze fell on Amara, the small girl who had dared to touch a piano meant for kings and queens of society. She had expected clumsy fingers and laughter, yet instead the child had brought silence, tears, and something Isabella had not felt in a long time: humility. Her lips parted, her voice softer now, stripped of mockery. "You love her," she said to Grace. Grace's chin quivered, but her eyes burned steady. "With all that I am." The weight of those words landed in Isabella's chest. She had no children of her own, though whispers in society often asked why. Some said she was too vain, too busy, too devoted to appearances. Others guessed at heartbreak hidden behind her perfect smile. But whatever the reason, she had never known the kind of fierce, unshakable love she saw in Grace's eyes now. Isabella inhaled slowly, then turned back to the crowd. Perhaps, she hesitated, swallowing pride like a bitter pill. Perhaps adoption is not the answer. The room buzzed at her words. I see now, she continued, her voice steadier, that to tear this child from her mother would be a cruelty greater than anything. But I did promise something, and I will not leave this evening without making good on it. Grace blinked in confusion. Amara lifted her head slightly, her wide eyes searching Isabella's face. Isabella turned, gesturing toward the piano. This girl has a gift, a rare one, and it should not be wasted in kitchens or hidden in shadows. If she is to play, she should play on stages. She should learn from masters. She should have every opportunity her talent deserves. Murmurs of approval rose. Heads nodded. Even Mr. Whitaker allowed a faint smile. Isabella looked directly at Grace. I cannot take her from you, nor would I dare. But I can open doors that the world has closed to you. From this night forward, I will sponsor Amara's education at the best music academy in the country. She will have instruments, tutors, and the chance to become everything her father once dreamed for her. Grace's hands flew to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, I don't know what to say. You say yes, Isabella replied simply, though her tone was gentler than anyone had ever heard from her. Amara stared up at her mother, her small fingers tightening around Grace's hand. Mama, she whispered, does this mean I can really play? Not just here, not just at home, but for everyone? Grace's tears fell faster, but she nodded. Yes, my darling. It means your music will fly further than we ever dreamed. The guests applauded, not out of politeness but out of genuine admiration. For the first time that evening, Isabella did not stand as a glittering queen above them all, but as a woman who had stumbled, faltered, and found a fragment of grace. Later, that night, as the last guests departed and the chandeliers dimmed, Amara returned quietly to the piano. The hall was nearly empty now, just her mother by her side. She touched the keys again, her heart no longer trembling with fear but glowing with possibility. The notes she played were softer this time, a lullaby just for the two of them. Grace listened, her hands clasped, her soul full, and from the corner of the room, Isabella stood in the shadows, her arms folded, not with pride, not with arrogance, but with something humbler, respect. For in that moment, it was no longer about wealth or status or appearances. It was about a little girl who had turned mockery into music, cruelty into compassion, and a single evening into the beginning of a future no one could have predicted. Amara was no longer invisible. She was no longer just the cleaner's daughter. She was a voice the world had to hear.
If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more heartfelt stories, and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Until next time, stay kind, stay inspired, and never stop believing in miracles.